Hi, I'm Dory Wilson. Welcome to another episode of Data Renegades. I'm head of data and growth at Recce.
I'm CL, CEO of Recce. Today our guest is Maxime Beauchemin, or simply Max. I'm super excited about our conversation. He's the creator of two very popular open source projects, Airflow and Superset. Both turned into huge commercial successes. His work has actually defined the data engineer role, which has now evolved to a broader spectrum of different roles, and bringing the functional programming concept to traditionally very stable and ad hoc data workload. He truly is a pioneer in the data space. I met Max again this year at the 2025 DBD Coalesce conference in Vegas, and we chatted about the future of the industry, agentic workflow, and a bunch of other things. And I knew I wanted to invite him on the show. I'm excited to speak more. Hello, Max.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here and to be officially now a data renegade. That's an interesting title. It's kind of fitting, I don't know, I like the term. I like the branding.
Yeah, totally.
I think you always have been one. We're just kind of, we're the official tag now.
Great, super excited. So can you take us back to the beginning? Like what problem first pulled you into the data space?
Oh my God, that goes way back. I'm not even sure if I should start at the beginning there, but I think it's interesting. So I started my career at a company called Ubisoft. That's kind of in an interesting position right now, but they were really big in the early 2000s, and I started Ubisoft Montreal, super fun company, video game company, young, fun, dynamic, and then like within I think 6 months or a year, they're like, "Do you want to go work in Paris?" So I'm from Quebec originally, so I grew up in Quebec City. I speak French. So I was like, heck yeah, I want to go. I was like 20 years old. I kind of skipped college. I didn't really go to college or anything like that. So I had the internship turn into a let's go to Paris for 6 months, which turned into 3 years. And then at the time when I joined, they were starting to look into building a data warehouse or just like analytics solution. So that was early on, but there was fair amount like tooling and precedent. So they had at the time SQL Server Analysis Services or the SQL Server stack. And then I picked up the Ralph Kimball book on data warehousing, read through it, and it kind of made sense to me, or I knew about entity relationship diagrams and how to do some data modeling and kind of learned that, analytics data modeling was different from building apps data modeling at the time. And then built my first data warehouse with a very small team, basically me and some other good dude, Mustafa. Say hello if you're listening. But Mustafa and I took on more of the OLAP cube side of the house, so SQL Server Analysis Services, but contributed to the warehouse. He built a lot of the warehouse there, and then put some tools on top of it. Some interesting tools at the time. Something people don't realize is, whenever software goes through phases, and every once in a while or every 5-10 years, we kind of rewrite the same stack on a new premise. And there's been probably two premises. So that was the desktop era. And there was some really cool stuff like in the desktop era. And OLAP was actually a pretty cool functional thing. Like languages like MDX, that's like multidimensional SQL. Was pretty evolved at the time, and modeling with cubes was kind of a thing. I also picked up for the financial reporting, they had bought Hyperion Essbase, which is an antiques at this point, but that product I think got acquired, but I think Oracle acquired Hyperion, but Hyperion was a multi-dimensional OLAP cubes with write back and some things we haven't seen in OLAP and since then pretty much.
Oh wow, you're really pretty early into all this.
Yeah, I was going to say, to date the period, what years would you put this in? What time?
2000 to 2004, but I won't tell the whole story, but I was at Ubisoft Paris for 3 years, and at some point they're like, hey, we need to kind of clone the work that we've done here for EMEA, for the European zone, for the North American zone. So like, do you want to go to San Francisco for a little while? I was like, well, that's what brought me to San Francisco. And rest is kind of history, but I went on to Yahoo before it fully kind of sucked, or it started sucking at the time where I was at Yahoo in 2007, and then went on to back to Ubisoft, Facebook, Airbnb, Lyft, and then started a company.
Wow. So I remember working with Ubisoft actually. So 2000, early 2000, I was working on version control system prior to Git. And Ubisoft and Apple were the two major companies using that distributed version control system I created. So we might have some overlapping friends there. And then just like moving to your what was the spark that led you to create Airflow and Superset?
So I was at Facebook for a while. So 2012 to 14, I think, is when I was at Facebook, and it was like a super cool, like Cambrian explosion of data tools internally. So some of which were externalized through open source, which was like super inspiring to me, right? Like so Apache Hive is Apache Thrift. I forgot all the open source like data projects from that era at Facebook, but I was, in the middle of that, and it's like thousands of engineers building stuff, like heavy hackathon culture, move fast and break things. So I definitely bloomed from there, like going from like a corporate world, jaded engineer to like, oh my God, I can build all sorts of stuff, and kind of seeing what can be built. So when I started talking with folks at Airbnb, and I was like, if I join, could I work on, do you have anything like DataSwarm was one of the data pipeline tools internally at Facebook. So not open source, just really cool tool that ultimately became the inspiration or part of the inspiration from Airflow, right? Like I'd used all sorts of different ETL tool at the time, from Informatica, SQL Server, what's it called? Not reporting services, but SSIS, integration services. Had used Ab Initio a little bit, and so like some of these different tools. And then I took kind of everything I had in my head and kind of data swarms, some of the ideas of like pipeline as code, Python heavy stuff. And then I was like, if I join Airbnb, will you let me work on what became Airflow? And they're like, totally, you can come and open source it. So that was the prompt for it. And then for Superset itself, it came within a year, I think, of Airflow. And the idea, the issue is that we were playing with Druid for Apache Druid for real time, like OLAP type use cases. And we had a large Presto cluster. And then we had not enough Tableau licenses for everyone, and Tableau didn't speak for these things, so we had to load, this data into Tableau extracts, and Tableau extracts don't scale very well, or at least they didn't at the time. So I was like, hey, maybe we can just, I think there was a 3-day hackathon, and I was like, I'm gonna build a thing that can query Druid and ultimately Presto, and then that turned into Superset.
Right, and then when you were
real
building,
quick. Some questions there. Okay, so, I worked at Uber, and we also had an incredible built-out data stack. When you were talking to Airbnb, what was the pitch to let them open source Airflow?
Well, I think it was like, okay, what do you have? I'm going to do some data engineering work here. What kind of tools do you have? There's this thing called Kronos that was based on Mesos. It sounded like everyone hated it. And I was like, if I'm going to come here, I'm going to need something like Data Swarm. I want to write dynamic pipelines as code. And I was like, well, I'm not going to work under these conditions. They really wanted to hire me at the time. Like the ex-Facebook folks were like, hey, why don't you come? So I was like, well, if you want to have me, that's like a part of the, not necessarily part of the conditions, but it's just a line, right? Like if I come in, can I build this? I think the trade was, okay, but you're going to have to own these two like big subject areas in the data warehouse. So you're still a data engineer building data pipelines, but if you want to build a tool to support your own use cases, but you're going to have like internal customers you got to serve. So I started building Airflow. I think within like a couple of months, I was running the pipeline for my two subject areas and refactoring them inside Airflow. And Airflow was like productionized, internally at Airbnb within like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. Did you have a team helping you out with that? Because that's a lot of coverage.
Yeah. So I just had like two subject areas. There was folks at the time Aaron Keyes, Jonathan Parks, and the team grew up. Like, these guys were working on the core data sets for Airbnb, and I was working on like customer success and forgot what else, and some on core. But I found a super cool team. I think they were called like the Etlians, as in ETLians, a little bit like aliens. But they were like super great. They are super great data engineers. They were like the first user of Airflow. We're sitting next to each other, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is cool," Yeah, I think it really helps to have like people, building actively, and it's like, here's the tool, and it's like, hey Max, like we need the feature to do that. Can you make backfill do this, or can you add a button to like clear a subdag or whatever? And I'd be like, okay, well, be and checked in by tomorrow.
So both projects kind of started as an internal tool, and then you had like internal customer help like perfecting that, turning it into something popular, and then open source. And then so when you were building that, did you know that it will kind of change the industry, or just like kind of scratch your itch?
I was going for it. I think it was my first like real open source project, but I was pretty inspired by the work I'd seen done internally at Facebook, and I was certainly going for it because I used to maintain like a list of all the companies I visited and kind of shilled Airflow at, and there was like more than 50 companies. I went on on a mission around the valley to kind of preach the value of Airflow early on, and that probably really helped. There's all sorts of things that contribute to making something successful, or like building a community and building a great product. Like if you don't have like there's time and fit. They call it project community fit as a like product market fit kind of equivalent. So the timing was good, the tool was good. It solved a real problem at the time. Was the right level of abstractions too. I think if you come with something, with more constraints and guarantees, like, where data engineering is going now with potentially like Airflow 3 and Dagster and Prefect, like these things are more advanced, but I really feel like Airflow was the right abstraction at the time. Like I want like a smart cron type of thing, and, it's the right time for DAGs. But maybe was not the right time for a lot more structure than that. But yeah, so it's like I went, do some evangelism at anyone who want to hear, and people were reaching in. People are reaching out to the CTO at Airbnb. It's like, hey, can you intro us to this guy who's building this thing? So I'd be like, okay, I'll jump in my car and go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, go to small and big companies, and show what Airflow can do.
So you mentioned, you started having like inbound equivalent for your open source for Airflow, and you pitched it to 50 companies. What do you think was the first thing that, built the equivalent of traction of really getting people invested in the community?
The core product, like it's a combination of things, but having a GitHub, I know like getting to Apache at some point was probably a good validation. Like, at first it was like github.com/Airbnb/Airflow. Actually, at first it was like my org, Mr. Crunch at Airflow. Then it turned Airbnb/Airflow, and then ultimately Apache at Airflow. So that helped, but I would say, I think, it's like having a good repo, being like, I often say that building open source is like one interaction at a time on GitHub, but like good docs and being present, generally, and, giving talks. I remember just I'm not like a public speaker type of person very much. I've done some progress, in that area, but I used to be terrified. But I was like, I'm terrified, but I want to go. Trying to tell the world about it because I'm excited. I want for this thing to get, get popular, get big, or get relevant, right? I think the big thing with open source is when you get hired by a company to do work, your scope of impact is limited to that whatever you can do within that company. So, as big as some of these companies are, you're not going to be able to have like an impact on the world. You're just like scoped in. So open source I saw as an opportunity to like find more relevance, just as a mission to be like, hey, I want to build something that matters, kind of deal.
Right, and then like at some point, like both got like commercialized, and then like offering commercial solutions to customer, and then but it seems to be quite different because you weren't really involved in like astronomer and other providers, right? But Preset, you're like the CEO and founder. For that. Can you tell us a bit more about like how that happened?
Yeah, the question everyone asks is like, why didn't you start an airflow company? You know, and I think like my passion had moved on. I was kind of done with data pipelines. I was like, if I have to write another line of SQL in my career, I'm gonna murder somebody, you know. But I was excited to work on the meta problem, like writing pipelines. I was over it. Writing Airflow, you know, was a much more interesting problem. But then ultimately, like even that, I was like, oh God, I just got that yucky feeling thinking about data engineering. Like I was like, I'm just done with that. I'll go do something else. And then data visualization is like super interactive visual. Like my hobbies at the time, I was doing a bunch of digital arts for things like Burning Man or just for fun, like writing code that produced like flashy, colorful, interactive things. So data viz seemed like a much more fun space. And then I really wanted to disrupt BI. Like BI is just like this old kind of shitty proprietary thing. So it's like, let's just take a big like hammer. What do you call the big hammer with the big, you know, that big in French is in mass. I was like, I just want to go smash at the BI vendors with open source.
Still want to do that.
Yeah, I'm still,
I don't think unfortunately much has changed.
Still swinging, you know. But I mean, it turns out it's a lot harder to disrupt a market like that. There's a lot of product surface in BI. So it's taking a little bit more time to really fully take over, but we're certainly chipping at it and taking some bigger and bigger chips as we swing. So you know, it was a bigger challenge and maybe more fun. I've always been really interested in like UX, you know, and you know, visual, colorful, interactive things on screen as opposed to, you know, mountains of SQL tech depth, you know. So yeah.
What do you mean? You just don't like looking at just pure table outputs and turning that to business insights? Your stakeholders don't like that? I'm shocked.
I like the analysis side. I think I'm a good data modeler, so you know, that's kind of a lost art. So I still do a lot of our data pipelines internally at Preset because I'd rather just, you know, do it than hire someone to do it. So I'm still a practitioner in all sorts of ways, all on, you know, the modern data stack, you know, startup style. So, but maybe that's like 5 or 10% of my time. So that's good. And it's all directed to like, because I have the business questions that I want to answer myself, like, you know, so it's actually fun if we start logging some new like product behaviors and stuff like that. I might be the first person to plot it, to say like, how's our AI feature rolling out, you know, and that's the discovery aspect of data is still super fun to me. And then I don't mind, you know, creating a few DBT models or, you know, Airflow pipeline to get there.
And no murders involved, right?
No what, sorry?
No murders involved.
So you mentioned data modeling is a lost art. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
I don't know if it's a lost art, but or maybe it's just not an art. So there used to be books on the topic, like people would read the Ralph Kimball books. Maybe people still do, arguably, but it feels dated. You know, it's like hasn't been like a renaissance in data modeling. I still don't think like star schema is the whole story. I read some articles on data modeling. So for a while I was passionate about functional data engineering. So I read some articles, gave some talk on you know, applying the concepts of functional programming to data engineering, and somehow it clicked. I think it just worked. It was like things we were doing implicitly, you know, at Facebook and Airbnb, and then I started working on Redux, working on the front end. Actually, I learned more about functional programming because that was en vogue, you know, with front end engineering at the time. Learn all about Redux and the concepts. I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. We just need to kind of put it together and establish a bit of a narrative. You know, the parallels kind of clicked in. So I talked about that. I think recently, or not, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote something about entity-centric data modeling, which is this idea of like kind of deviating or augmenting dimensional modeling. And then if you go entity-centric, to say like, it's okay to put metrics in your dimensions. It's okay to add blobs to your dimensions. We don't have to be as strict about, fact and dimensions being segmented. So there's an interesting article there. I'm not sure. I haven't really talked to people. I don't know if it's been like well received or if people put it in practice, or some people were like, oh, we've been doing that for years. Like, why are you even writing about that? I was like, well, no one had written about it, so why not?
Do you think that's scalable?
I don't know. It's like anything can be or cannot be. It's like anything pushed to an extreme is not good. So say you could say that is putting all your facts inside your fact table strictly and no facts and dimension. Is that scalable? Or putting all? I think if you push any idea to an extreme, it becomes kind of stupid. But yeah, I think it is pretty scalable. I think the blog post on the topic tries to cover on that. There's something really interesting with like how it relates to feature engineering too. So some of the ideas came from feature engineering, which is used for ML, but like feature engineering by nature is extremely entity centric, right? They don't really know what fact is outside the concept of an entity. So kind of learning about that, and the rise of like blob support in data warehouses and databases made it easier to do so. So started thinking about how do you represent time. All of a sudden, if you have one row per entity, how do you represent time? Been talking about snapshotting dimensions for a long time. So that's one thing. And then, pivoting time inside a column potentially, or saying like DAU, MAU, and in a customer table, it makes sense to have, DAU, MAU, weekly active users. Those are metrics, but they're super useful to say, give me all my customers that have more than 50 MAU without having to do some sort of like subquery, on a fact table to do so is like super, super great. And there's a lot of stuff that if you do entity-centric data modeling, there's a lot of queries and things that come very naturally that you probably would not bother to do if you have to, write a bunch of like much more complex SQL.
A lot of joins, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of gatekeeps the data a bit more because you have to understand multiple tables versus a couple. Yeah. All right, a question on this topic, and then we go on to the next one. You mentioned kind of your inspiration for visualizations, including Burning Man. Was there any one project or something that was inspirational to you?
Yeah. Well, so what I was talking about is that at the time I was going to Burning Man, and I would I would like have projects.
Also,
yeah.
by the way.
Oh yeah. So people don't know, look it up, and you're probably gonna be like, what the heck is this thing? But it's a big festival in the desert, and it's bring your own contribution. So it's like made by the people for the people. It's non-commercial. It's kind of spontaneous, and well, I don't know if it's that spontaneous, but people bring art and costumes and try to make it fun. So it's a big week-long party, and then I was doing some electronic type art, so making some projects of like flashy, glowing things. I have some nice stuff on my old blog, but was playing with like digital arts in general. Things like, a camera, or kind of psychedelic mirror to a camera where when you move, it leaves like trailing, so you can kind of look at yourself, and as you move, it, generates colors or particles and things like that. So I've got a bit of a portfolio of like digital arts, either in screen or, with LEDs and things like that. So built a bunch of stuff there, which is all like visual and interactive and real world in that case. But if you join kind of data engineering and this hobby, maybe somewhere in the middle fits data viz.
Yeah. The interactive nature, certainly I see that, how that plays into data modeling and Git BI.
The colors, animation in some cases, so yeah, color, animation, interaction, so it's like probably in the conceptual space, maybe the multi-dimensional LLM space, like data viz and data engineering, like, or if you have like digital arts somewhere in that multi-dimensional space and data engineering in another, somewhere in the middle, you might find, data viz.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
I think you mentioned, so with, we talked a lot about Airflow, but we haven't talked as much about, we talked about the data visualizations with Superset, but how did you get started with the open source community there and building it out?
So I think I started at Airbnb similarly, and then there was an internal project, and I was like, should we Apache or I think people from, I forgot which company came over and they're like, hey, we want to contribute, but we'd like for it to be Apache before we do, which turned into no contribution, but I think it's a good thing. I've got mixed feelings about Software Foundation, but Apache is great. It provides good guarantees. I think people still care about like governance and having some governance guarantees around open source. I was like, oh, let's put it in Apache too. It doesn't hurt. And then maybe kind of thinking of the future, if I want to start a company around it in the future, not a bad thing for it to, for the IP to be in neutral in the Switzerland of software at Apache. So I was like, okay, let's do that. And then I think we announced it, try to do things right in terms of announcing it, giving talks, writing blog posts, all the normal shilling.
Yeah. True.
But from there, like you actually start a company to support like Superset users and customers, right? And then how did your perspective kind of shift from open source community building to like company building?
Yeah, so I think like, my life's mission for the past 10 years has been to take over BI with open source. And I thought that building a company was the best way to support and accelerate that. At Airbnb, if I had stayed, maybe we'd have a team of like 2, 3, 4 people working on Superset. On the other side, if I raised money and started a company, believing that, I think commercial interests can really coexist positively with open source, right? But like, I was like, this foster child of an open source project needs, a parent type organization around it to structure it and to justify doing some of the things that need doing for this project and community to be successful. And, raising capital from VCs. And the VCs at that point were kind of begging for me to start a company. So I think I was turning 40 at the time. And I was like, oh man, I'm in Silicon Valley. People are just like, giving me term sheets to go straight into an A round, raise a bunch of money. Like if I don't do this, I'm gonna hate myself forever. I mean, I was on a path to like chase IPOs, right? So I probably would have been Airbnb to, whatever the hot next IPO was at the time. So I probably would have been at, OpenAI, Anthropic, or someplace like that ultimately. But I think I would have regretted not starting a company if I had not done it.
For anyone listening, considering being a founder, take that as a sign.
Oh, I try to convince people to not be found, or I put people to the test when people are like, oh, I'm thinking about starting a company. I think the best service you can do to them is to challenge them on it to make sure that they know what they're getting into. So I'll be like, no, you don't want to do that, and if it stands, I'm not saying that I don't want them to start a company. I just want to only do it if they're have strong convictions to do it. I think it's kind of a health test or a healthy thing for people to like, they need to survive someone like Max is telling them not to make the jump. Because everyone is like, yeah, go start a company, this is the Silicon Valley dream, the American dream. I'm like, well, make sure you know what you're getting into.
Exactly. Make sure you know what you're getting into. All right, coming back to like data engineering and kind of like how the landscape has changed in the past 10 years. But what do you think that's still the hardest part of data engineering today that nobody really talked about?
Yeah, I gave a talk at the Airflow Summit around like the fact that we don't share data pipeline code, right? It's like the struggle for code reuse in the data transformation layer, I think is what it was called. But you go on the front end. I just built like a front end app in like less than a month. That's like incredible, and it's because people on the front end, there's all these frameworks and toolkits and component libraries and back end and front end, like all sorts of packages. Like you need a date picker, like, plug it in. In data engineering, there's kind of nothing like that. So everyone's reinventing the wheel at every single company. It's computing like their growth accounting pipeline and their DAU, MAU, their experimentation framework. And it's, a lot of that stuff feels like tech debt before it's even committed to a repo. So I think SQL is like super convenient, but like templated SQL really, like, I don't know. It's like not good enough for sharing. There's some issues around, dialects too. So even if I gave you a pipe on my DBT project, you couldn't use it because you don't use BigQuery, and it's just a big mess. So that's that's a bit of an issue. Maybe that's fundamental. Like we're not able to share transformations. I wrote a big post on this topic too. That's probably a good. If people are interested on the topic, forgot what the blog post is exactly called.
We'll find it like in the show notes.
Yeah.
Then, but do you see people like trying to solve that problem, or does this got to be solved from a very different perspective? For example, like from BI layer to figure out what the questions being asked, or like how do we actually solve that modularity and co-reuse problem?
Right. I think one big issue. So I think the blog post talks about unified data models, right? So if everyone's data models are different on the input and on potential on the output, and their combination of data model is also like conceptually different, it doesn't work. So we need to have like unified data model, or what I call parametric data pipelines. So, but like there's no real way. If you wanted to write a good parametric reusable data pipeline today, until recently there was kind of nothing to do that. Like you would try to share a DBT project with like templated SQL, maybe Spark, but like I don't know if you're like, here's a Spark pipeline you can reuse. Be like, I don't run Spark. I don't want to run Spark. So what's the right medium for people to do that? Like there's no NPM package for data engineering. So I think in the blog, well, one thing that really helps is like we have now with like Fivetran and Airbyte and other things, like the foundational data integration, like the E in ELT. I guess the ET, the EL and ELT has been standardized, so that could be a good foundation. Like now that if you use Fivetran, I use Fivetran to sync, I don't know, my Salesforce or HubSpot, we have the same data model to start with. So that we've seen some DBT like staging area type projects get shared. Seems like a good place to start. But like again, DBT was not the right language because it's not multi-dialect, right? So if I write something in a dialect and it won't work in a different dialect, maybe SQL Mesh looked promising too, right? Yeah. SQL Mesh is like you write in one language and it's like dialect agnostic. Yeah. So kind of promising, but like the building blocks aren't there, and then people just don't think that way, you know?
And they are now the same company. So,
that's it. Now they're all the same. I don't know what's going to happen with SQL Mesh. Unfortunately, I don't have insider information too, or like what's the future of Tabika. We depend on SQL GLOT. In Superset we use SQL GLOT, right. So we're hoping the project's going to remain like well maintained.
Right. Okay. So like throughout your career, like and then working with data and data tooling, what is the most painful bug or failure you've seen in production? And then what have you like learned from that?
I think like there's probably two things I can talk about, but one was called data apocalypse at Airbnb. I think someone was I think it was Friday, and then we needed to like make some room on HDFS on the cluster. And then someone in infrastructure, whose name shall remain undisclosed, ran like some RM, like Hadoop RMRF, command with, they were like doing like /TMP, and maybe they wrote /TMP, but so name nodes started crashing, and then we had like Cloudera engineers on site coming to try to restore a name node and fix things. So that's a pretty bad one. When I joined Lyft, maybe I'll start with like when I first started writing Airflow, I thought it would be useful to have a command that would be like Airflow space reset DB, because you work with like dev environments and sometimes you need to reset your database. Well, someone at Lyft thought they were on their dev environment, but they were in production, and they nuked our database. So then Airflow outage and but Airflow outage, which said to like restore backup, and then I guess if all the jobs are idempotent and everything, like restore the backup and Airflow goes back to work. And, so it was not that much of a disaster, but we did remove the Airflow reset DB command from the CLI.
Yeah. Long like hyphen like I'm really sure what I'm doing.
Are you sure? Are you certain? Here's your database connection. It says production in it. Now I think there was confirmation on the CLI too, but it's like sometimes you feel like you know what you're doing and you're in a hurry. Or, I use this command every day. Oh, God, I forgot to change my environment variable.
Okay. Yeah. And then I'm going to switch gear to data team and data culture, as in you work with a lot of different data team, and then probably have your own data team within the company. And then what do you think is the kind of the open source role of shaping a healthy data team?
Well, I think like a theme, and I think like I sit in a place in the data universe, that is like just my neighborhood in the data universe, and people care a lot about open source, like where I sit. But it's probably kind of self-elected. And if I was to move to the Midwest and go sit at a Microsoft shop, they would be like, "What? What are you talking about?" But I mean, a theme that I hear in my bubble is data sovereignty. I think people don't want to be stuck with proprietary vendors that lock you in. And so I think like if you use you're just at the mercy of your proprietary code vendor. You have to like influence them to build the stuff that you need. Where in open source, you can always take your stuff and run it, or contribute the fix you need, or fork things. For me, there's no going back. But in terms of like using open source everywhere we can, wherever it's competitive, but even like we're ready to take a product that's not as complete or great, just for that guarantee to be true. I think that's becoming more and more true. I think in the age of AI, open source, it accelerates, I think, the win rate of open source too. So software's eating the world, open source is eating software, then AI is eating everything maybe. But I think like because the models are trained on open source, I think there's like a more natural bias towards working and using open source from the users and their models perspective.
Right, totally. And then I think you mentioned that you're working on a new project, and then I know there's like Claudette and Superset development, and then we just touch on AI, and then love to hear your thoughts about kind of what's kind of the agentic workload for data look like in the future.
Yeah, I was like so much thought on that to unpack, because I've been kind of in a tunnel of like just spending my living in Claude code for the past 9 months. Started coding like 10 hours a day again, just because it's like I woke up one day and I felt like I had superpowers. I cannot like if you're operating at 10x your so let's say I mean it's not a great analogy, but if a surgeon was like to wake up and they can they can perform 10x the surgeries, they'd be like, all right, line them up. I've got superpowers that save some lives. We're not saving lives, in data, but I definitely just have this sense of like duty to like, oh my God, if we're flying, like let's go fly, let's go cooking. So that's interesting. Now, in terms of like, yeah, Claude is kind of an interesting thing. It was a pain point of like, we're going so fast, that I can work on multiple things at the same time. So I'm going to have like multiple AI windows, and I was cloning repos multiple times, discover Git work trees that allows you to have multiple branches checked out at once. So I've been using Tmux forever, but I'm like, I organize my Tmux to have like one tab per project, and then having multiple superset environments running at once. So I can have like, this project's on port 9001, this one is on 9002, and I can have like multiple Dockers. I got a Mac Studio, so I could run, dozens of instances of Superset without my laptop getting hot or overheating. And then Claudette was this idea of, just a little CLI that allows you to stay sane while having like multiple instances of Superset running. You can look it up. There's a blog post. That's an open source project. You might want to consider doing that for your own, repos or projects. It just makes it really easy for people to, start like create a work tree, give it a name, assign it a port, start and stop an environment, nuke a Docker database, detach a volume, like all these commands, instead of being, like, oh, what's the command again to do this? You're just like, Claudette, do this, Claudette, do that. And then everyone at Preset, and I think in the Superset community, started using this workflow. And then, we're mostly staying sane while working on like 2, 4, 6, things in parallel. And it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, this is so inspiring. I think the traditional developer experience, people would optimize for like your own iteration, right? You got a command to run every test and all that as soon as you make changes. And then now this seems to be totally like really 10x with like we just invoke like an agent environment for the agent to work on stuff.
Yeah, I think that holy grail, like something I'm working on. So I'm going to launch something soon in the agentic coding space, like kind of collaborative workspaces. Call it like Figma for agentic coding. If that makes any sense? But let's check it out. Maybe in a few weeks, or maybe depending on when you listen to it, maybe it's like sometime in the past. But like one of the holy grail for me is like shared dev environments. So there's so much like pushing and pulling. Right, you're like, okay, I'm gonna work on this feature, open a PR, then someone reviewing the PR is either working blind or Superset super visual, so they have to like pull the branch, fire up a Docker, test the thing, and if you're lucky, it's the same day. Maybe it's the day after, and they're like, oh, this button should be like 6 pixels to the left, and there's so much friction and async built up, and it made sense when we're switching branch, working on a thing at a time, and coding for entire days before the PR is open. But like when the PR takes 10 minutes to go, like you don't want for the code review or someone pulling and firing an environment to take a day, right? That's just slowing us down right now. So I'm thinking of a place where people can collaborate on work trees on the same like Docker environments and like prompt the same AIs, and maybe using different AIs like to be able to say like, oh, well, Claude Code failed at that, I'm going to try Claudette, or I'm going to try like Gemini Claude Code Codex in parallel on different work trees and see which one builds it faster. I'm just trying to augment my carbon footprint and GPU time. No, but there is something like you literally feel like if you're not taking the max advantage of your Cloud Pro Max plan, like it's like what are you doing? You're not.
Exactly.
You should be reaching those GPU limits every 4 or 6 hours period.
Yeah, I feel this is becoming very common for like software development, but like for data development, it seems that we have not had this building block for like faster iteration or more agentic parallelized development. What do you think that's causing?
Yeah, so I don't spend I am the data team for Preset, so I don't spend a whole lot of time there, but I was working on I rewrote the sessionization pipeline for a marketing website recently, and fired up Claude Code, and then the dbt CLI does not, or at least like the old one, maybe the new one, doesn't have access to SQL. It can create a model, but it cannot read like a sample rows or run queries directly. So somehow it doesn't have access to dataset, which is a blocker. So I wrote this CLI for Superset called sup, as in what's up, or SUP. And you can say sup SQL, select whatever, and it will run the SQL, and you can say dash dash JSON or dash dash CSV, and it will return things. So I gave Claude Code sup and dbt CLI, and I'm like, all right, let's go iterate. Let's write the sessionization pipeline, and it did very well. Like Claude Code is good at. I mean, we knew that from GPT 3.5 onwards. Like it's good at writing SQL. It understands dbt. Like the docs are great. It's fully trained on it. So I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I'm thinking like analytics engineering is like software engineering is getting disrupted just as fast, if not faster. Fire up Claude Code or Codex or Gemini. I mean, I can only really vouch for Claude Code all that much, but tell it where your DBT, or it should know that you have DBT and you have something to write SQL that you can visualize, or not visualize, but like get some rows, like what are this thing value in this column, so I can write a case one statement, or what's the distribution of this column, what's the percentage of null, like it can run these things, and you'll see the agent, run a bunch of SQL, write SQL, templatize your stuff. It's great. I think it's, getting disrupted as fast as other things, though. SWEs are probably gonna, we see a lot of SWEs that are like parallelizing workflows, writing MCP servers, and then just like all in, like I am all in on agentic coding. I think it's going to take a little longer for data engineers and analyst engineers to just be like, all right, I'm AI coding all the time. I want a Max Pro plan. I'm going to burn some GPU cycles today. Let's get cooking. But I think it's going to come quick.
Yeah.
Like, it has to become quick, or you're gonna someone's gonna take someone's going to do the job of like 5 or 10 people. It better be you than one of the 5 or 10 other people. And, I mean, I don't want to make it like a Hunger Games thing, but it's like, yeah, to get on agentic coding all day, every day, or you're like, you're behind.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of, we're getting near the end. So, there's a question I want to get in. It kind of returns to something you brought up earlier about we're seeing more consolidation in the data space. With you mentioned Fivetran acquiring DBT and Tobeka, which of course makes SQL Mesh. How do you see the data space evolving in the next couple of years? And do you see this consolidation? I think you kind of touched on this, like helpful or hurtful long term for data teams.
I don't. There's maybe one way to look at it. I forgot who I was talking to at Coalesce, but this idea stuck with me, and they were saying like there's two ways that the VCs make money, right? Like one is, or it's always by disrupting a market. Like there's two plays. One is to deconsolidate a market. So there's some established vendors, I call it, Microsoft Tableau, whatever, like the data stack would have looked like in the 2015 or so there's deconsolidation, like go and invest and create a bunch of disruptive startup, innovate. And then there's consolidation where like, so you see these cycles. I think we've had the modern data stack is just the marketing name for deconsolidation in the data space. It needed to be disrupted, right? And I'm not talking smack against the VCs. I think disruption is good. Investment drives innovation. So we've seen a huge cycle of like hundreds of data companies getting funded. Now, like you look at those logo slide for the modern data stack, and you're like, okay, like what am I supposed to buy? What works for what? So I think like we're entering. We're officially, I think, in a consolidation cycles. Let's figure out which one of these companies work well together, and verticalize some of them. I would rather have more open source and more defederated stuff. Personally, I think more choice, but too much choice is like no choice, right? You go to the supermarket and there's like 50 kind of ketchups. You're like, you just don't know what kind of ketchup you want, and you might just not buy ketchup because there's too, like, you're like, okay, decision paralysis here.
Yep. Okay, and then one of our very last questions, we'll get into our wild card kind of data debug questions. What is something we should have asked you but didn't?
Oh goodness, I don't know. I mean, like the open-ended question is like, what's data practitioner job in 5 years, and I don't know. I really think the world is changing fast. Get on the train and get moving. Maybe like the most immediate thing is like if you're not using AI all day, every day, an agent, you're writing any code that's not written by an AI, like I don't know what you're doing. It's like let's figure out prompting. I don't know where that all takes us, but one thing that's clear is like the whole like software is eating the world, the digital transformation from like 2010. I think that becomes even more true, or like tech eats other profession. But then, tech eats itself, and then AI eats everything.
Yeah.
But I don't. At least, like I think, being on the tech side, I think we are. If you look at most professions, I think are going to be more technologized. And then at least like as a software engineer, you can contribute to that. And then otherwise, we can all go and be plumbers and electrician or artists. I don't know.
We all going to go to Burning Man projects.
Yeah, I'm hoping for like universal income, potentially as one solution. I mean, that stuff is true, right? Like the cab drivers, truck drivers, that's a lot of people to do, like, to figure out what to do with, and the tech sector, the art sector, like, all the information workers are like, I think the thing that's like, I think AI is kind of ready, is getting good real fast. The one big break on that I see is just human adoption. So like this stuff, like everyone should be using AI all day, every day, maybe, arguably. And that's not the case, right? It's going to take a moment for some companies. Like I spoke to people at the Airflow Summit. They were like, I was like, so what do you use for agentic coding? And they're like, oh, we're not allowed.
Oh.
Yeah, they're like, we can't at my company. It's not approved yet. So I was like, oh, got time to shift, switch job. Or maybe you have
Yeah.
really good job security, or maybe quite the opposite. I don't know.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we wrap, we're gonna put you in the data renegades round. Quick fire questions, short answers. Are you ready?
Hopefully, I don't know. Let's see.
All right. First programming language you love or hate or have strong feelings about.
Uh, Python love, SQL don't love, but it's okay, you know.
Okay. Tabs or spaces.
Oh, definitely spaces.
Biggest bug you've ever shipped into production.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna pass on this one. Too much all day, every day. Hey, but it's not just about quality rate and failure. It's about recovery rate. So that
MTTR.
fast at fixing.
Yeah, move happens, break things, and fix things. What's your go-to data set when you are like testing like a concept or visualization or whichever data tools?
I mean, we have a really good revenue dashboard, like SaaS revenue dashboard, and as a CEO, I should probably obsess about revenue, but that's my main dashboard. So a lot of the bugs I report on Superset are from this revenue data. But I mean, it's like product usage, like basically the user usage
Okay.
information with revenue in it and behavioral stuff. So it's
So it's
basically
all
the
your
preset.
production data.
Yeah.
Your own production data. Okay, cool. We only test in production.
Hey, yeah, who's got time for staging or development data set? Wait, do people really have non-production data in data? Maybe.
Okay, what's the one lesson from outside of data or software, like sports or arts, like influence how you build?
I mean, there's the digital arts. Maybe I don't know. I mean, I live in Tahoe, so I'm in nature, and maybe that's like I do a lot of hiking and walking in the woods, and people talk about like shower thoughts. So I don't really think in the shower. I think while hiking
Hiking.
and biking. So I'll be like thinking about the project and the data models and design and things like that of like what I'm going to build next while I'm on hikes or mountain bike rides.
Wow, amazing. Uh, what's your one hot take about data that you're willing to defend on the podcast?
Hot take that I'm open to share. I don't know. I really don't know like where data engineering and analytics engineering goes with AI, but I think it gets extremely accelerated,
Mm.
and then tech debt, like AI can't manage the mountains of tech debt we can do there. So I think there might be more contraction there than in software engineering in general. So watch out. I don't know.
Oh, you think the contraction for a data professional is going to be more
I,
than software?
More, I think so. The adoption, so the break to that is speed of adoption. I think,
Mm.
but the people are going to figure out agentic coding on their large DBT projects and Airflow, DAG repos. I think are gonna maybe have a higher multiple over their peers than Swedes, but it's unclear. It might be the same similar ratio, but adoption's gonna be laggy. But then the ratio of replacement
Okay.
might be higher.
Okay. Well, time will tell. What's the nerdiest thing you've automated in your life?
I don't know, but I'll tell a story. God, what was it? Someone got Airflow to automate a coffee machine at the Airflow Summit, I think. And then someone had done like home automation with MCP, so they wrote like an MCP server
Right.
for their like turning on their lights and opening their garage and things like that. I've not done that. I'm too busy kind of solving real problems, but
But
I
you
don't.
build software enabling people to do weird automations.
That's it, potentially. But yeah, writing MCP server for everything seems like a really interesting to do right now.
Right.
I don't know. Home automation is an obvious one. I'm not sure what else. But yeah, if I was thinking like if I was still at Airbnb or I'd be writing like an MCP server for just about every service right now.
Yeah.
Uh, and maybe writing like MCP gateway type. It's like if you think of the concept of an API gateway and you apply it to like MCP infrastructure, I think there's some really good ideas there.
Cool. And one last one. What's your favorite podcast or books that's not about data?
What podcast do I listen to that are good? I mean, I've been I've been obsessing over agentic coding. So there's some I could send some notes in the keynote. I don't know the name of the creators, but I see their face in my head. So there's people like talking about like agentic coding, Claude Code specifically. Like they do every week like what's new in Claude Code this week and what are all the tools in that ecosystem. So I'll share some, but it's not data related. It's definitely tech related.
Okay. And then so we reached the end of the lightning questions. And then how can listeners find you and be useful to you?
GitHub. I mean, I'm Mr. Crunch on GitHub, the Superset repo. That's probably the best place to find me, the Superset community. By the way, like if you have not tried Superset in a while, you should try it. Apache Superset is just like a great BI tool. It's fully open source. Apache 2 license, ASF sponsored. You can try it for free, up to 5 seats on preset. So that's a great way to try it. Then you can decide whether you want a commercial offering or you want to just run the open source project yourself. But recommending people to try that. Otherwise, where to find me? You know, Twitter. I try to stay away from Twitter. I just get like a bad feeling in my stomach when I spend time there. But if you DM me on Twitter, I'll eventually see it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, Max. This has been an incredible just conversation, and thank you to all our listeners for joining. We will see you next time.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Bye.